Welcome back. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey, this path of conversations about mental health, especially mental health during pandemic, which feels different. It feels to me personally, there is a heightened sense of I'm paying attention to my mental health in different ways than I did a year ago. And so for this kind of concluding time together, we wanted to talk a little bit about that sense of mental health. Yes, we have this path that we've talked about, the three stages of the labyrinth that we hope we kind of cover some of that information, some of that sense of going into the labyrinth as we release those expectations and some of the hopes and dreams that we had that we felt like we were releasing at the beginning of pandemic. We come to that space in the center where we receive from God, receive that kind of sense of meaning or what is changing. And then our last conversation was about returning and how we assimilate that information into our life and how all of that is a path. It is a journey. Nowhere do we just arrive. And so I think for me, paying attention to mental health is knowing that it's a journey. My journey with mental health has been on and off to a therapist and a spiritual director. And I've kind of gone back and forth between the two because I felt for my mental and spiritual health, I need to pay somebody to listen to me. Although, people get to listen to me all the time.
Right,
Anyway,
right.
but I think in a different sense,
Yes.
I wanted to, as you were saying in the last conversation about kind of, I want somebody to wonder with me about what that means. And so for a time, I was seeing a spiritual director because that conversation felt more spiritual in nature. What was God up to in my life? And then I hit this moment where I knew that spiritual conversation was spending more and more time around issues of childhood and trauma, and like I needed some therapy. I needed to have that conversation with somebody who had different skills than my spiritual director. And now I'm back to a spiritual director, but I pay attention to that sense of what's happening. And so I hope what we're saying and what you're hearing is a paying attention, an invitation to take stock of what's happening internally so that you can get the help that's needed, so that you can tell a friend, boy, it sounds like you might want to go see a therapist. I want to kind of destigmatize the need to go get help. That somehow in our Western American do-it-yourself kind of culture, we have said that it's not okay to get help.
Sure.
And I want to debunk that.
Right.
So I want to invite you to think about that for yourself. But I also kind of want to hear, like, what's your sense of when somebody comes to you and you think, is there ever a time where you would say, I don't know if therapy is what you need right now?
I mean, I think I talk with all my clients, either directly or indirectly, about what the right path for them is going forward. And some people will have a single session. There's this, mostly because of the psychoanalytical movement, that feels like if you go to therapy, it's got to be for 20 years. And then you end up on the couch and you end up paying this person just to talk. And that's not what modern therapy is often like. It's a generally comfortable place. We're using a whole lot of different techniques. It's not really just one where you lie on the couch. And some people come for one session, and that's enough. I've had multiple couples this year who just needed to touch in and just
Yeah.
have a,
Yeah.
are we on the track? We want to have a conversation about this, and it's been a little bit heated. We just don't want to go down there, so let's come in for a session.
Yeah.
And then that's all they've needed. And I
Wow.
think that's awesome.
Yeah. Right?
I like telling people, like, if we can do this in one session, that's what I'm going to aim for. If it's going to take 10, 15, it's going to take 10, 15,
Yeah.
depending on what your goals are. So the big question comes down to is, what do you want out of this? And then let's find out what that direction is.
Yeah.
And I've said to people, like, I'm really comfortable talking about all sorts of theological concepts in therapy. One of the reasons I chose the program I did is because they included that within
Yeah.
the training. But I know that not everyone wants to include that with me, or that they want it in a more trained way than I've been able to do it in terms of spiritual direction. I'm not trained in spiritual direction. And I've actually suggested do spiritual direction as well or separately. And so it's finding the path that's an appropriate mix for you,
Yeah.
I think is an important part of any choice. And also knowing that you don't have to take the first therapist that you get. Everyone has very
Right,
different
yeah.
styles. We change doctors all the time
Right.
because we just didn't like how they did it.
Right.
I have my style of therapy that I think works for a lot of people, and so I like it. But there's certainly people that are like, it's not really what I'm looking for. And we'll talk about, well, here's a recommendation. I'll give them 3 names of other people who I'm not affiliated with, because that's just best practice.
Right.
And want them to be somewhere where they can actually get the best out of this.
Right.
I'm obviously a big believer in therapy as an approach. Having seen, even going through my own training, they talk about the self of the therapist, and you have to go through your own history and do a lot of your own work so that that doesn't impact your clients. And so seeing that change, I think I can see that almost anyone could get benefit out of therapy if you want to do that process. But not necessarily everyone needs therapy, and that's a big difference.
Yeah. So what would you tell somebody, like, how do they know, like, it's time for me to look at getting therapy? And then the second part of that would be, where do they start? Like,
Yeah.
what do you do next?
Sure. So some really practical things in terms of when I'm ready. From in-house, we tend to look at things of, is it affecting how I'm living my life? Not that you can't go to a therapist another time to talk things through, but the time that you really want to talk to someone is if it's having an adverse effect on either your relationships, your work, your church settings, you're losing resources in some way as a result of something that's a challenge to you. Whether that be family or friends, or just your own inner peace, not being able to sleep, all these sorts of things. So when it really starts to affect your life and it's gone on and you can't see the way out, that's the time to really start thinking, should I see someone? Now, that could be a spiritual director. It could be the time to talk to a friend first and see what they think before you go and see a therapist.
Yeah.
And that would be, that's the questions to start asking. But if it is a therapist, then come in knowing that you want to work on that is obviously a step forward. And then we can decide with the therapist what would be the way forward with that.
Yeah.
In terms of getting started, if you are fortunate enough to have insurance, then you can look at the list that they provide and pick one off the list.
Right.
I do recommend that you don't feel like you're stuck to the person that you particularly get assigned to. If they're not a good match, that's fine.
Right.
If you get everything out of 2 sessions, no problem. Generally, we recommend that you give it at least 3 sessions with someone, unless there's a personality clash. 3 sessions to see if this is right for you. Because the first one's a lot of paperwork, getting to know you, hear about it. The second one's a lot of assessment. Let me hear more about what's going on for you so I can really picture it properly and see about that way forward. It's only really the third one that we're really getting into some practical a lot of the time. Not always the case. Sometimes it's much quicker, but as a general thing, that often happens. So giving it about 3 shots if you can, outside of sort of personality differences, is what we recommend. If you don't know, you can search online, you can do all these sorts of calling, you can get in contact with people who you know who are therapists, ask friends.
Right.
It destigmatizes it, first of all, which is great.
Right.
Because we all have times where we need assistance. It would be kind of crazy if you broke your leg and say, actually, I'm not going to go see the doctor because I think I'm strong enough to make it through this.
I'm going to heal it myself.
Right. And I mean, yeah, it probably will heal eventually. You'll just be in a lot of pain for a long time. And if you can find a quick way from that, then you would want to do that.
Right.
And this idea that we're somehow psychologically weaker because we need help, well, for one, it's not logical, because when there's a stigma in our society and we ask for help, that actually makes us stronger. So paradoxically, that disproves itself right there. But it is. If we want to be strong people, we have to do the workout. We have to do what we need to get stronger.
Yeah.
And so I think that's part of it. So asking friends destigmatizes it, but also they know what you're like. They might have a therapist that's a great match, someone who they can trust, who has a style that matches them, and they kind of know you. I really like this therapist. I think they'd be a great match. And that always helps as well. And then you want to look at some specialists. If you've got something in particular, there are some people who specialize in different topics, and there's generalists and different things. And it's okay to ring and call and ask, this is where I'm at. What's your experience with it? Have you done this before? Is this something you'd be comfortable working with? What sort of thoughts are you thinking as an initial? Now, they're not going to have all the answers at that point, hence why the first couple of assessments.
Right.
But it's the same way that you would test anything out. Therapists aren't scary analyzing you every time they have a conversation. Because it takes way too much headspace to be able to do that all the time. So certainly even in social settings, I don't have, I'm enjoying it. I'm not analyzing you right there. Though I have seen a t-shirt that I think is hilarious that says, keep talking, I'm diagnosing you. But therapists don't have the headspace for that. When they're with you, they're with you.
Yeah.
They want to be with you as a person, not as a subject.
Right.
They're not doing it all just to assess you and give you a title. So they want to know what this is like for you, what your experience is.
Yeah.
And so being able to connect and ask the questions that you want is a real normal human experience. So ask the questions about your experience and how you would see the therapist. Ask about the therapist. I don't think the therapist has to be like you to be a good match. Sometimes a different viewpoint is good.
Yeah.
And they're trained to meet you where you're at.
Right.
If you only wanted the same solution, you would ask someone in exactly the same situation who hasn't made it through. So the similar is not always the best solution. But sometimes if you're more comfortable with a female therapist or a male therapist, I take no offense. I've had people call and say, I really want a female therapist. I'm really sorry. It's like, no, whatever is most comfortable for you in this setting is what I want you to have, so that you can be through this as quickly as possible.
Because the goal is health.
Yes.
The goal is, you as a therapist have the same goal as the person coming for therapy.
Yep.
You want a healthier outlook on life, or a healthier kind of way of walking through life.
Right.
And I think that sense of, the example of breaking your leg, your leg will heal, but it won't be the same kind of healing if you go to a professional.
Right.
I wonder where it started in our culture, that sense of going to get help, and particularly psychological help. Where did that start? That was not okay. That to not be okay wasn't okay.
Right. It actually starts really, really early. At the very beginning of medicine, when they felt that your moods were linked to your bodily functions. So if you had too much blood, then you had this malady.
Right,
if you had too much phlegm, right.
Yeah, right.
And so there was something biologically off if you had some sort of emotional response was off.
Interesting.
And so we linked it to disease pretty early on. And then it really got kicked hard in around the more 19th century, early 1800s, where we started to associate difficulty, especially with substance abuse, with morality. And said you were morally deficit if you had an addiction issue.
Wow.
And we know that's not true.
Right.
The research will tell you there's circumstances, there's a whole lot of reasons why people get in that issue. But even now we have some, in our culture, we have a
Yeah.
little bit of leftover.
Yep.
There's something not quite right about you, that you can't cope with this, that you
Right.
need this.
Yeah.
And certainly there are things that we need and things to be adjusted, but it's not a question of lower morals that mean that people are suffering in this way.
Right.
And so we had that original biological understanding that linked with our emotional, and then we kicked it even harder when we started to look at substance abuse was really coming into the fore around that stage and,
Yeah.
and became a bigger deal. And we know that a certain amount of what we experience is physical, but it's not all.
Right.
I can have a perfectly good night's sleep and wake up cranky, just because it's the morning and too
Right.
early. And I can be unhealthy and still feel emotionally really balanced. So, but there are links, but they're not always a definite link.
Right.
And we go through difficult circumstances, and that's got nothing to do with our physical well-being. We're going through a hard time, and it's hard, and we
Yeah.
call it a hard time. So that's the reality of our situation. It's got no sort of impact on our own strength, weakness, difficulty. It doesn't make us a better person or a worse person. Even with trauma now, the research shows it's got nothing to do with your actual resilience. It's got a lot more to do with the circumstances that caused the original trauma and your particular state that you happen to be caught in at the time. So how can we prevent that? It's kind of hard because of how trauma works, but it's got nothing to do with a weak person is more susceptible
Right.
to trauma
Right.
than anyone else. So we've debunked it a long time ago. It's just no one else, we still have it as part of our culture.
Yeah. Well, and especially when when it gets tied to morals and
Yeah.
judgment, and especially, you know, the way a church community can judge each
Sure.
other for any number of reasons,
Right.
from what you wear to church to whether you go get therapy.
Sure,
You
sure.
know, I think that there's that sense of leaving all that at the door
Yeah.
is what we hope happens in church. We all know
Right.
it
Right.
doesn't. So I think that's why this particular topic is so important to me
Yeah,
as
me too.
pastor, is that you know, New Life talks about being open to everyone. We welcome all, and that means all. And all includes folks that are going through really hard stuff.
Right.
And if we say we welcome all, I want us to be a place that talks about mental health and
Right.
talks about the need to acknowledge it's okay to not be okay.
Right.
And so I think this is a perfect topic for New Life to kind of manage and talk about, because I want to destigmatize that sense of, you know, it's not anything to be ashamed of. That I think shame is probably one of the worst human traits
Sure.
that we inflict on one another. And so I think that sense of it's okay to reach out and have this need.
Right. Right. I don't know who said it, but I remember someone saying many years ago, if you ever find the perfect church, don't join it, because you'll ruin it. So this idea that any of us is perfect is
Right.
not there. But it's
Yeah.
also this gradient of health. And that's this journey that we talked about a little bit, is that you wouldn't say that someone who goes to the gym is physically unhealthy. No, we'd actually say they're healthy and they're doing something.
Right. Right.
They're putting effort in because to them it's important that they're not just riding the line and they're not unhealthy. They want to be extra healthy. And we would do that with our emotional health and our psychological health and all sorts of different elements of ourselves. And so to make the line that you only have to see someone when you're unhealthy and when something is really wrong, definitely I think it's a good idea when it's going there to get some support.
Right. Yeah.
But I've got a couple that comes and sees me regularly, and they come in for yearly checkups. They're mostly fine, but it's their commitment the same way that they would go to a doctor to say, I'm just getting my yearly checkup to make sure everything's right.
Yeah.
And that's just part of their health, about their mental health together, their couple's health,
Right.
to put towards that. Or I have a client that I haven't seen for a while now, but every now and again just says, can I drop in for 3 or 4 sessions? Because I just want to talk this through.
Right.
I haven't seen them for a year now, but it's about getting the need when you do, because it's not that they were really unhealthy, they just don't want to ever be back there again.
It's kind of maintenance mode. It's like,
Right.
getting your oil changed,
Right,
you know?
right. And keeping the car running and
Yeah.
healthy so that we don't break down.
Yeah.
And so there is this dichotomy where we used to talk about mental illness a lot, and I'm really glad that we talk about mental health.
Ooh, yeah, that's good.
Because health is a spectrum of experience. And no matter where you are, you can get better at it. And it's a question of, is this something that I should look at to be a little bit better? Or am I comfortable where it is? Or is it dipping, so I need to give it attention? Or is it going really well, and so I can contribute to other people's lives in a healthy way and help them with their mental health in a different way? So that mental health thing, I think, has been a big change in terminology. I appreciate.
Versus mental illness.
Right.
Yeah. Or dis-ease, like that
Right.
the way we talk about it matters.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think again, that's part of debunking and that stigma of what's wrong with you
Right.
if you need therapy.
Sure.
Well, no, it might be what's right with me.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. If you
Yeah.
can look at your circumstance and say, I want this not to stay the same. Wow, you've got some great analysis skills of when you are in a good place and a bad place.
Yeah.
That's a healthy thing.
Yeah.
If I didn't know when I was getting sick, you'd call me unhealthy. And so the knowledge of knowing when I should do this or not is actually a sign of health.
I think that's interesting because I think especially during this time of quarantine and things are different,
Yeah.
and there's enough different about life right now that it feels like, at least for a time there, I felt less able to analyze my own health
Sure.
because it just felt like there were so many plates spinning.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think I would just invite you to take some time. Like that's what I would hope. You've taken the time to watch these conversations. Maybe take another 15, 20 minutes in the next week or so. That's about been the length of these videos, but another 15, 20 minutes to spend that time kind of doing an evaluation of your mental health. Where are you? Are there places in your life that things are not working so well? Is there a point at which whatever is happening is really making relationships or work or physical health affected, so that you can have an action step for what to do next.
Sure.
And if it's not, if you spend that 15, 20 minutes and you go, I'm doing okay, then perhaps it is that time to use that mental health for somebody else, to say, hey, can I walk with you on this? I just think that's how a community would hopefully walk through this journey of mental health a little bit.
Right.
Well, I am so thankful to you.
No, thank you so much.
This has been great.
It
I
has.
almost don't want it to end. But we're so thankful that you've joined us on this journey as well. I want to thank Brian Cole, who's helped in the video recording of these sessions, and again to CJ, and we hope that this has blessed you, and if you have additional questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us here at New Life. I can send you CJ's information as well, if that's okay.
That's
I guess
fine.
I should have asked you that
That's
ahead of time. But we are so thankful for this conversation, and we hope that it blesses you. So we want to wish you healthy blessings.